So you survived through the tutorial, and you're probably asking yourself, what's next? Well, it's time to level some handguns. Handguns are support units that start coming into play at the mid-game stage that provide buffs for other guns and vision during night operations, and through leveling, handguns turn into great evasion tanks or DPSs depending on their kit. They have low HP and firepower, average accuracy and rate of fire, but high evasion. As for their targeting algorithm, they target a random enemy within their range of fire. Seeing how handguns work in the real world and are often given to officers and spies, their role in Girls Frontline reflect as well, as handguns usually support the squad with buffs and debuffs. Handguns have extensive tiles and are able to buff every weapon class that exists, and also have skills that will buff everyone in the squad or debuff enemy squads. Although handguns do have low HP, their high evasion makes up for it and lets them able to function as evasion tanks to certain extents. Do note that even Wellrod, who is considered the best handgun tank, falls behind IDW in terms of pure tanking ability. But in return, what you get is the superb tile buffs and skill, which overall increases the DPS and the survivability of your tanks. Though 5 handgun compositions are a thing, that's more of an endgame content, so don't worry about that too much. That'll be covered in a future video. Now, other than for the reasons of great tiles and skills they bring to the table to support other guns, handguns are also critical for conducting night operations, because out of all the classes in the game, handguns are the only class that provide vision. Here's some reasons as to why vision is important. For starters, you can't deploy new squads if you don't have vision of headquarters or the helipad. Following that is 2, you can't see enemies if they're right next to you. And to follow up on that, if you move onto a node where an enemy exists, you'll be forced into combat regardless of whether you have the ammos and rations required for combat or not. Though there are other methods to gaining vision, primarily by taking control of radars or using the illumination fairy, but radars are stationary and fairies require fairy points, and it's only active for a limited amount of turn, and it has a very long cooldown, so both of them aren't exactly optimal solutions. Thus, making handguns the, well, only choice you have when it comes to gaining vision during night operations. Now, another reason why handguns are great is that they have the fastest movement speed of 15 to reflect their lightweightness and mobility in the real world. To give you a comparison of how fast this is faster than ARs by 50% and 4 times faster than rifles and MGs. Learning how to utilize handguns' movements to effective kiting can be the difference between being able to compete at the highest levels or not in future content. But before even getting to that point, their high movement speed makes it easy to redo the squad's formation immediately after starting an encounter and for dodging bosses' skills. It also helps that their primary stat is evasion, and paired together with their high mobility, they make for a great sub-tank or even a main tank. And probably because of how light handguns are, compared to other classes in the game, they consume the least amount of ammunitions and rations, as well as having the cheapest repair cost and shortest repair timers. Because of such reasons, they're used quite often in 5 handgun comps when farming for limited drops at endgame content, and thus have little to no merit to level early game, as during your early game stages, you should be focusing on leveling that foundation first, which in turn leads to more efficient leveling methods such as 4.3E and 0.2. But as you progress in the game, you'll notice the utility of handguns and level them more and more, but that's later on in the game. Like everything in the world, while the handgun looks perfect, there are some flaws. Primarily it being with the drop rate from constructions. Even though the handgun recipes are the cheapest in the game for any other class, the drop rates can be extremely shitty, and in the end, you'll be doing so many constructions for them that it offsets their cheap recipe cost. Not only that, because you'll be needing a bunch of T4 exoskeletons for handguns and SMGs, you'll be starved for those, as you can never have enough of those as rare as they already are. So that doesn't really help either. But if you can get past those points, handguns are great and you can never have enough of them. Now, let me get more in depth as to why leveling handguns early game has no tangible merit. Even though handguns sound like something you should have an abundance of, there is an exception, being when you just start the game and are in early game. Though they do make a great evasion tank, when you look at their stats excluding evasion, most of it is pretty subpar or very low, especially their HP. Not only that, unlike other classes, handgun's tile buffs scales with the amount of dummy links the handgun has. In other words, unless the handgun has been dummy linked 4 times at level 90, because 1 mainframe and then 4 dummies, you're not receiving the full potential of the handgun's tile buff, making them inefficient for early game when you should be focusing on bulldozing through the story for logistics and leveling strong dolls who can do that, as well as being able to handle hobo running 4-3E until you can hobo run 0-2. Simply put, handguns are usually only useful once the remaining DPSs are able to cover for the loss of a DPS after being traded in for a handgun and receiving the handgun's buffs, and assuming the handgun is also properly leveled and geared. Thus, beginners are often told to not level handguns in early game, even though they are the most common class to drop. Though there is an exception in early game, being when you're going through chapter 1 and 2. In chapter 1 and 2, some 2-star handguns are viable if properly leveled and dummy linked, and sometimes are the better choice than some 2-star ARs that you'll never use again. So in the long run, using some 2-star handguns such as PPK, Nagang Revolver, or MP446 will be the better choice than other 2-star ARs such as Galil and L85 due to their high drop rate and low rarity, which helps dummy link them at very low to zero cost. Not to mention, with M14 being a day 1 reward with the renewed 7-day login reward bonuses, it further promotes using 2-star handguns during the first few chapters. But once you get into chapter 3, using SMGs will be a more stable tanking option than handguns like Scorpion or Sten. Now, when you actually start leveling and building compositions that use handguns, make sure to take what kind of DPS you're building the composition around into consideration and optimize the composition. For the 2 classes that are usually paired with handguns, MGs usually benefit from accuracy buffs, and rifles usually benefit from rate of fire buffs. Obviously, there are exceptions, but you usually can't go wrong with buffing any kind of DPS with firepower for any kind of composition. Since handguns are primarily there to buff the DPS, their ability to do anything usually doesn't matter. The only time it would matter is when the situation where they have to do some tanking happens, assuming they have the appropriate levels, stats, and equipment to back it up. Though there are handguns with skills specialized in tanking that do exist, again, like I said before, that's only viable once they're properly leveled and geared, and if a new player tried to take that handgun and use it in early game, well, the handgun's gonna get blown to pieces in a blink of an eye. Now, there are cases where you won't be using handguns, as the tile buffs of the complementary classes works best without handguns. Usually that is the case for ARs and SMGs, and sometimes but not always MGs and shotguns. Thus, handguns are usually used in compositions such as 2 AR, 2 SMG, 1 handgun for gaining vision during night operations, 2 rifle, 3 handguns to maximize the rifle's DPS while maintaining the squad's ability to tank, and 3 machine gun, 1 handgun, 1 shotgun to push the machine gun's DPS potentials to the limit and also maintain their ability to tank, as having that extra handgun over the extra DPS will be better for most cases. Outside of providing vision, supporting machine guns, and farming limited dulls in 5 handgun compositions, handguns are only primarily used in 3 handgun, 2 rifles most of the time. The 2 rifles mow down enemies with the buffs they receive from the handguns, and the 3 handguns help finish off damaged enemies to prevent DPS loss. Even against bosses, with some good sacrifices to RNG, you can finish the encounter without losing more than 1 or 2 links off your main handgun tank. Though 3 rifle, 2 handgun is possible and probably may have more DPS, the downside of this is that DPS loss is more than likely to occur when rifles are overkilling enemies when handguns could have finished them off. Not only that, because the composition only has 2 handguns, the squad's tanking ability is much more unstable than if the squad would have had 3 handguns. Though 2 rifles are the norm, as long as you can throw in 2 strong DPSs, even ARs and machine guns will work. But due to the diverse DPS kits and archetypes that exist, you have to make sure you choose the appropriate handguns that can give buffs to complement the DPS's kit. And if you want to take this concept to the extreme, you can do 1 DPS and 4 handgun compositions. The most famous composition probably being Exodia, with IWS, Wellrod, 5.7, Calico, and Stechkin, and what my friends and I like to call the Bastion of Sleep, which is composed of G11, Grizzly, Mark 23, Wellrod, and Colt Revolver. This one is the older composition, which later gets updated by replacing Wellrod and Colt with Contender and K5. And the more recent, as we Koreans like to call it, M40 or Cinnamon Cannon, is basically Exodia, but you replace IWS with M4. This should give you an idea on how versatile handguns are and the utility they bring with them. If you want more cool endgame content that involves handguns, check out the videos below in the description. I've gathered a few examples that highlight how great handguns can potentially be with the right preparation. Otherwise, that's it for the handgun breakdown. For the next video, I'm probably going to do a breakdown of chapter 7.5, otherwise known as hypothermia, otherwise known as Arctic warfare. I'm also probably going to do a rundown of it on stream a few times before the actual event hits the server, so keep an eye out for that as well. I'm going to get this out of the way before I move on to the machine gun and shotgun breakdown video, as even though the event is far away, I want to make sure this is available to all of you ahead of time so that you can get a feel for what the event is like and prepare ahead. Otherwise, sit tight and look forward to it.